Managers of Reddit, what is the most unprofessional thing an employee has done that resulted in an immediate termination? Fired a guy in his first week for browsing and downloading P at work on his lunch break, on a computer in a large open room that other people worked in, at a government organization. So caught him red-handed, warned him not to do that, already thinking this guy will be fired at the end of the day but have to go through the channels, was a weekend shift. Then 2 hours later, he does it again, at the same place. At that point, I had the VP's approval to just fire him and we will deal with the paperwork on the Monday. Let him go. He's shocked but doesn't say much. Being the only manager on site, I take screenshots of the sites he visited, forward it off to HR and the VP to document it all. A few days later, the guy's father calls the VP to complain about his son being fired. Guy was in his mid-20s. Apparently, the fired employee never thought him being fired on the day he was busted for browsing pornography on a government computer in a government office was a reason to be fired, and he never told his irate father about this. So the VP deals with this very diplomatically, saying employee was viewing inappropriate content at work, was warned, continued bad behavior. Father doesn't accept the explanation, so the VP starts reading off the list of the sites that were visited. All of them were hardcore sites geared towards large African American women. Fired employee was Caucasian. The real kicker to this was that the VP believed that the fired employee was listening in on his father's conversation via another phone. Just as the sites were being read off, there was a very audible click of that phone being hung up. That last sentence though. My husband is a manager and his employee somehow had another employee's ID and then stole that person's check and cashed it. Caught it all on camera. She still denied it. In the legal field, that's called the shaggy defense. But we saw you sign the paper, it wasn't me. We even caught you on camera, it wasn't me. In auto sales, one of our salesmen always seemed to be up to something. Between all lying to customers, drug abuse and constant fighting at home, he was impossible to manage. Unfortunately, he was the type that gave the rest of us a bad name. Eventually he got into it with our GSM about several issues, and his go-to was to start making fun of our GSM's handicapped son. I had so much respect for our GSM. He took him in an office, told him he was terminated and walked out, even though I know inside he was boiling with rage. Glad he's gone. Gotta give your GSM credit. Dude's got serious control to not just sucker punch the prick. I would have. Not a manager but had to share. Worked at Jamba Juice. Co-worker put bare hands into his pants and scratched his crotch at the register while helping a guest. When the guest commented, he put his fingers in his face and said, "Smell it." I had an officer under me. He was reported in a tree. I went to investigate the last place he was seen. He was still there, attempting to pepper spray birds. I wish I could have made that up. Fired immediately. What's hilarious is that pepper spray has no effect on birds. They can't taste it and it doesn't irritate their eyes. I own a tree removal service. Hired a guy as a ground worker. He worked great the first 2 weeks. Didn't complain. Seemed to know the work. And I paid him well. The third week working for me, we did a job that consisted of 2 big box elders to be removed. It was 95 degrees that day. I told all the guys that day, don't push yourselves too much. Make sure you're getting enough fluids. And if you need a break, take one. The new guy drove his own vehicle to the job as he needed to leave that day 40 minutes early to make it to a dentist appointment. We are like 40 minutes into the job. I notice he's moving really slow. Just looked really unmotivated and like he didn't want to be there. We had the customer's driveway blocked off with brush everywhere. At this point I'm still climbing in the tree and I see the new guy driving through the customer's yard, which was like 2 acres, and then onto the road in a serious hurry. I called him probably 30 times to make sure everything was alright. Didn't hear back from him. My other employees had no idea and were in shock. They saw him hop in his truck and just dart. He decided right then and there, frick this, and left. Still haven't heard from him to this day. I didn't terminate him. That's the closest I would have come to firing someone. I don't know if I would have fired him if he showed up again the next day, but he would have had to do some pretty good explaining with a sincere apology for not letting anyone know, and having the rest of the guys pick up the slack. My construction company was building a new addition on a hospital. One morning, the president of the hospital called to inform me that he had just watched one of our laborers smoke crack in his truck while on break. Went to the job site, talked to the kid. He said I was, but I waited till break time. You aren't supposed to drive your personal vehicle to the job site for liability reasons. Oh yeah, and you're not supposed to smoke crack, even on break. We've had some winners over the years, but that kid took the cake. Obligatory this blew up comment. I've edited the first part of the story to be easier to read. I apologize. My bedtime brain likes to use run-on sentences. This was definitely one of those situations that was not funny when it happened but is a hilarious story now. Thanks for your comments. Not a manager, but I had a teacher who was fired due to a spectacular display of poor judgment. I was in grade 5, so 9-10-year-olds. The teacher decided to reward some good behavior with a movie in class. We were given a choice between movie about a family in the mountains and a movie about a ghost. We picked the family because we thought the ghost movie might be scary. It was The Shining. We watched it and edited in class. Some kids hid their faces through most of it. Most of us went home and had terrible nightmares, and the teacher was forcibly removed from class and fired the following morning. Interestingly, I encountered my story as an urban legend 20 years later when I was completing my teaching degree. In case you're wondering, the movie about the ghost, it was Poltergeist. Nice. We were shown Nightmare on Elm St. in 7th grade science while our teacher graded tests. When my mom called her on it, she told the principal that she was really busy grading and didn't know what was on the TV 20 feet directly in front of her for 45 minutes. It was even her own tape that she brought from her home and put in the machine. So far as I know, she still works there today. Wasn't the manager at the time, but I work at a movie theater and we, like most places, have a rewards program. You show your card to the box office cashier as you purchase your ticket, and as you cycle points you get free drinks, popcorn, and eventually a free ticket. This one cashier, who seemed to always have tons of cash on her person, would take the guest free tickets and keep it. When the next guest would come and pay exact change, she would use the free ticket and pocket the cash. We do have cameras in the box office, so it was shock she got away with it for so long. She got caught because a very regular guest asked to speak to our GM and was wondering why she isn't getting free tickets anymore. Fast forward a few days, the same guest comes back, but she can't stay for her movie. She had to leave and wanted a refund. Our GM goes down to handle it for her and notices the ticket was a free movie, so we can't give her a refund. She insisted she paid exact change to the cashier that was there a few hours ago. She reviews the footage and sure enough, exact change for a ticket, no coupon, but the cashier had in front of her and slides it sneakily to use. GM greeted her in the break room and told her to take her stuff home. She no longer works here. I was the manager at a local concrete plant. We hired a new yardman whose responsibilities were to drive the payloader and load the plant when needed, and keep the piles of sand and aggregate pushed up and clean. I trained him for a few hours on the machine. He had experience, but on a different style of loader, and then returned to my office. A while later, I look over the yard and see the loader sitting on top of the 3/4 gravel pile at 45-degree angle, bucket full and raised, motionless. I called to him on the mobile radio and got no response. The piles were in the far back of the yard, and for the next few minutes I called again and again, but my calls were unanswered. Fearing a mechanical, or worst case scenario, a medical emergency, me and one of my dispatchers ran the 150 or so meters from the office through the yard to the loader, and there he is, on his cell phone. I climb the ladder and bang on the door, and he responds in a rather loud voice, "Hey, I am on the phone." I immediately tell him to dump his bucket and come down off of the pile. At first he ignores me, but after a second request he complies, but he is visibly aggravated. He proceeded to ask me what my freaking problem was, to which I respond, "My problem is, as of right now I need to hire someone to drive this freaking loader. Get off the property." He was very sour about it, and as the three of us walked back to the office I radioed the owner, who had his termination slip ready when we got there. Well, of course he had to get halfway up the pile. Cell service probably sucked at the bottom. Had an employee come back from work on drugs. Pretty sure H or some other opiate. They could hardly stand. I saw them drink out of 2 glasses and then try to take them to their table for the guests. I stopped him and brought him in the office. He then told me I was unprofessional and didn't deserve my job. Things quickly escalated. He left the office and walked into the restaurant. A random table asked him for a refill and he told them frick you. The police got called and he was escorted out. He then passed out in his car with the heat going on a warm spring day. Luckily another employee noticed him while leaving. He said the windows of his car had started to build condensation on them and the guy was slumped over the wheel. 911 was called again. The guy could hardly put a sentence together until the police showed up again. He then somehow pulled it together as the police pulled up and he drove away after talking to the cops. A few months later he was on an arrest site for possession of M&H and had a few other charges. I was a partner business but wasn't involved in the day-to-day management or anything much anymore. Started another venture. I'm a big rough looking black guy, which is important for the story. I can't remember the reason, but I needed to sign some paperwork and it had to happen within the hour. I think it had to do with a big client and some type of equity in their business in exchange for service. So I left the gym and drove straight to the office. I was showered and clean, but in casual clothing, jeans and a t-shirt. When I arrived, the receptionist said very loudly, "Can I help you?" There was already something off with her tone, but I didn't really care. I simply said yes. I'd like to see Mr. Hampton. He's expecting me. I should have said my name, which she'd have maybe recognized, but I don't know why I didn't or she didn't ask. She didn't pull up a schedule, ask on the intercom, call his line or anything. She then laughed and said, "Mr. Hampton doesn't take walk-ins, so this alone wouldn't be a big deal," even though I think the laugh is rude. She then turned her chair away from me with her back facing me. I said excuse me and she put headphones in. There was one other guy waiting to see our office manager for a job as a courier and he was kind of snickering and amused. It was embarrassing and unacceptable. I then raised my voice and said, "I need to see Mr. Hampton and I'm going ahead." As I said, "He's expecting me." She just laughed, but wouldn't buzz me in. It's a set of office suites and to get to what we call the bullpen you have to be buzzed in. I don't know if she saw me through the glass, but the office manager ran up and buzzed me in and greeted me by name. The receptionist went white as a sheet. I could tell she was crapping bricks. I signed the papers and let my partner know what had happened. He walked out with me and just told her to pack her bags. Legitimately fired on the spot. When I look back, I feel kind of bad for her, but it was so ridiculous. There's no reason to treat anyone that way. A client could have turned up underdressed as well. Absolute madness. Don't feel bad. A decent receptionist would have asked for your name and checked with her boss if she doubted he really was expecting you. The fact she went as white as a sheet when she heard your name shows she knew it. I was supervising a tech support call center. One of the female techs walks up to me, face white as a ghost. I ask her what's wrong. She doesn't say a word, just gestures for me to follow her. I do. She points me around a corner of cubes. I find one of the agents with pee on his screen. Trousers down, hands busy. We did him a solid. Security escorted him out. They packed up his belongings wearing gloves. We told him we wouldn't press charges if we never heard from him again. I left a few months after that, but at least while I was there nothing more was heard from him. I think for some reason he really wanted to lose his job and couldn't make himself quit or come up with a less lewd way to get himself fired. This particular call center wasn't shy about calling the cops either. Before I became a supper guy was arrested for cramming orders for extra commission. Ended up having to pay full restitution and 2 years probation on top of it. Loved bragging about hard work and dedication too. Retail manager. I had an employee that we hired for a seasonal position. She worked pretty well but was kinda loud and obnoxious. She liked to sneak food to her cash register and eat between customers despite a couple of warnings. I thought I saw her with food at her register again, so I went to investigate. As I walked up on her, she had a full-on fast food meal sitting in an open drawer with a customer in front of her. She realized I was standing behind her and said, "What the frick are you looking at?" She was terminated on the spot. She even went as far as to purposely bump into me while leaving and started screaming that I hit her. She had announced that she was pregnant a week or so earlier, so of course that played into the drama. She said she was going to sue me for hitting her and her baby. She was freaking nuts. Nothing ever came of it. She called the district manager later that week to complain about me. I had already sent the DM the camera footage, so he just politely told her to frick off and we never heard from her again. Not a manager, but when I was in a meeting with some people that came up from Netflix, super important meeting, with super important people, one of the women from sales, who honestly didn't even need to be there, but she was often very pushy about getting into meetings and usually got her way, farted, and it stunk bad. It was a relatively small boardroom, and it got quite hot during the winter. Well, this normally unpleasant room was now filled with an extremely unpleasant odor, a scent that paints a picture of an abandoned old folks home, where the trash bags of dirty diapers and moldy soft foods were left to sit and rot away with the building. It was a very obvious fart smell, to say the least, and we all heard it, and knew who it came from. But, as mature adults in their place of work, obviously no one said anything, and the meeting continued until the woman that farted, overwhelmed with embarrassment, interrupted the meeting in order to blame the fart on one of the Netflix people. It was super awkward, completely derailed the meeting, and I believe even legitimately angered both people from Netflix. She was fired before the Netflix people headed back to LA. Not a manager, but I worked at the store and was friends with the junior manager who told me about it. It was a well-known clothing store. My friend D was closing up for the night along with another manager P. As they were closing up they were chatting. It was Friday night, so they were asking about weekend plans, etc. P said he was too broke to do anything. D took out one of the cash bags, went to grab something else for a second, came back and started doing the cash for the night. The store had this policy that I think is stupid. If they were under or over up to €100 they didn't question it. So as D is sorting out the cash for the night, P starts talking about his plans. D said, "Didn't you say you were broke?" P said something about cash he forgot he had. D was suspicious but kept quiet. The following day, P was off and D was in. He went to her manager and told him his suspicion that P had taken some of the cash. They checked the security camera for the previous night, and sure enough, in the split second D was away from the cash bag, P came up and grabbed a €50 from it. They then checked footage and realized that this guy had been swiping €50 100 every night he closed the till. He varied it so it was never exactly the same, and kept it under the something went wrong here limit. The head manager called him to come in, said someone had called in sick and they needed him to cover. I guess he figured they were onto him and he never showed up. He was from a different country. I guess he went back home because he was never heard from again. They estimated he stole a serious amount of money because he worked at the company for several years and regularly closed the till. Early on in my career I was a manager in a big Fortune 500 company's call center. The building we were in was built in such a way that you had 3 floors, and in the middle of every floor there was a square hole which allowed you to look all the way down to the ground floor, with a big light well on top so the building was very bright. On the ground floor there was a set of computers that everybody could use to do all their non-work related stuff, check email, Facebook, etc., etc. One evening I was working a late shift when one of the security guards comes over to me and asks me to come with him. So I follow him to the balcony and he points downwards. One of the guys who wasn't on my team directly but was part of the same language group I was a manager in, was sitting behind one of the PCs in the middle of the floor watching P and giving himself the old inside the pants rub down, so I instantly started laughing at the absurdity of the situation, which caused him to turn around, which in turn caused his dong, in his hand, to pop out of his pants as he looks up with a deer caught in the headlight look. The absurdity of the situation was hilarious, but what made it even better is we escorted him out of the building and told him to come back the day after to come collect his things and his P45 form to show termination of employment. When I told my manager later on, he went, "Oh, Dino was at it again, was he? Yeah, we've been trying to catch him for ages. He used to jerk it in the bathroom but we never were able to catch him." She left behind incredibly bad, incredibly X-rated, incest-riddled supernatural fanfiction on my computer desktop. Of course she wrote herself in as a Mary Sue. Of course she used the phrase hot meat love wand. Of course she cried and blamed her autistic ADHD for writing about Dean and Sam slamming her various little wet woman holes. Of course she blasted me on her Tumblr. Some explanations. This merry little tale took place in 2013 at a research facility. Fanfiction writer was already on very thin ice for screaming at her boss, boy, never finishing projects, and coming in late on multiple occasions, screwing up meetings, getting on my computer while I was in a meeting and writing about being the lucky Pierre Nadine and Summerfield Tower was the last straw. My co-worker found her Tumblr, which she put on her LinkedIn profile. Why? God, why? The piece was number 11 hour of God knows how long, so it started off hot and heavy right on the first page, which is all I got to. I got to meet wands and wet holes in nope like you wouldn't believe. All I wanted to do was write a memo. Dang it, she now works in a morgue in Texas. So she was a typical Supernatural fan. Source: I watch the show, enjoy most of it, can't stand the fandom. So I was young, and I was going with my uncle in his car. We found a beer distributor truck parked in the middle of the road. Literally he was horizontally occupying both lanes. We waited and when we saw they weren't planning to move my uncle got put and gently told them to move so we could pass. They said yeah but we waited another 5 minutes and they wouldn't move. So my uncle got out again and told to move. Now more firmly. Frick off. We are working. Don't you see? Go other way and they laughed. Then my uncle calmly called his best friend, who actually was the manager of that distribution company. He told him the issue and the number of the truck and then his friend immediately said sorry and hanged up. It seemed very rude, but then we saw that he called in the truck's radio and we heard everything. The manager was very angry and first told them to move, and then leave the truck there and go home. He fired them at the spot, over radio, changed casually to actually, and caroused to lanes. And BTW, that is a frick ton of upvotes. Tom Hanks for Reading. Man seems risky with a truck full of beer right there. My first boss was telling some war stories. Here are the best ones, all much more interesting than mine. In the 90s he worked for a phone company that purchased one of the first prepaid cell phone startups. This was a bad deal because it came with all their baggage, employees. From top to bottom was a total mess, organized crime connections, money laundering, stolen goods etc. The old manager, 5'3" in his 40s, fancipants, was banging several of the ladies. The ladies got extra perks for being his friend like extended time off, overtime pay when they did not work. It all fell apart when they learned about each other and got into a fight over him at work. 5'3" was fired. Ladies on probation since they were afraid of losing jobs if they said no. After that my boss was promoted and had to take over this mess. In 6 months fired 18 people. One young guy had family connections and major anger management issues. Let's call him AM. AM was not logging into phones, taking 2-hour lunch breaks etc. One day a co-worker gave him grief about slacking off so AM walks away. He comes back with his heavy desk phone and goes behind the guy who was sitting in a chair and yanks him backwards, sending the poor guy sprawling onto the ground. AM proceeds to beat the guy with his desk phone, sent him to the hospital. Obviously AM arrested and fired. One of the ladies earned extra money during lunch breaks. Let's call her Trixie. She was giving her male co-workers a release in the bathroom for a donation. At the Christmas party she got caught in the restaurant bathroom red-handed by one of the higher-ups. Trixie and her John were let go. Anyone involved in the Trixie and John mess ended up making the mistake of telling the whole story about the activities at work. Sounds like a dive restaurant in New Jersey. Why did that guy at work finally get fired? Guy in the shipping department kept calling the shop manager a clown to his face and was warned to stop. The guy finally got fired when he decided to play circus music at full volume the next time the boss man came around. This is pretty funny though. The music was a nice touch. She messaged in the group chat we had for employees saying something along the lines of how she hates the job and she hoped the building burned down. Loved that girl. Had a very similar situation at my workplace. Was insulting the store manager as well and apparently that's what tipped the scales. He was found sleeping under his desk. When awake he was caught repeatedly sneaking out the back door, no receptionist, and leaving for hours. He was taking credit for the work of others while trying to pawn his work off on the data entry girl. He worked there for 2.5 weeks. He put an ultrasound guided IV in a patient's artery instead of their vein. He wasn't signed off on performing that task yet and did it anyways. I worked with developmentally disabled adults. One employee was accused by a client, whom I've never seen angry before or since, of groping and staring at her naked body in the shower. This client didn't require any kind of supervision in the shower. The facility decided not to fire the employee, just move her to a different house. She was finally caught on camera sniffing clients' dirty underwear while doing laundry. No one was sad to see her go. I worked at a first-class business class lounge at an airport. Shift leader took pictures of me in the restroom and showed it to me laughing. He was given a stern talking to and a slap on the wrist by the general manager, and so I left the company. Heard from one of the co-workers that he got caught masturbating in the restroom and the general manager let him off with another warning. Turns out one of the big bosses of the company was the one that caught him during a personal trip and fired both the team leader and general manager. TLDR. Team leader and GM got fired for sexual harassment by a big boss after evading any type of repercussions. Good to hear they both got fired. Seen too many stories in this thread where the people that turned a blind eye and did nothing don't seem to have had any punishment. I'm a software engineer. My company hired a software architect who specialized in a different field. About a week after joining, he declared we need to restructure the whole software. So far so good, except the new structure was not clear to anyone but himself. He could not explain what was wrong with the existing structure. Now, software engineering is still engineering. There's some leeway, but ultimately there are right and wrong answers. Reasonably adept engineers should be able to communicate and convince each other of ideas, barring their egos. This guy, though, just sort of made up his own language. Like he'd tell you the software needs to be made of boondoggles connected to flimbusters, and you'd ask what he meant by flimbuster and he'd just launch into a long, 10 uninterrupted minutes explanation at the end of which you still had no idea. While this was going on, he was generally being annoying. Nothing earth-shattering, but he'd leave empty coffee cups on people's desks, would pull them in a brief discussion that would take up over an hour, badmouthed some of us to the rest of us, badmouth some of us to upper management. Generally sleazy stuff. It went on for 2 months. 2 months where we engineers genuinely couldn't figure out if the guy is a misunderstood genius or a scam artist, because nobody could figure out what he's on about, and he was extremely adamant about whatever it was, repeatedly bashing the existing architecture for being a dead end. It ended when one of us basically called him on his balls. Told management we can't figure out what to do here. Let's take all the time we need to make it concrete, and just spent entire days locked in a room with him and management, slowly forcing him to go into details. The endgame was for Mr. Architect to write a document explaining in full detail what needs to be done. He had 2 weeks. He didn't show up to work after they passed, and the document he left behind was just the chapter headings. I think we dodged a bullet, but the story is so crazy I don't think I'll ever be free of the doubt that maybe he really had a good idea I was too dumb to comprehend. Sounds like he was trying to take over the place by redesigning things in a way only he understands, so he becomes unfireable. Got caught vaping in a clean room with hydrofluoric acid, butanol, and a salt bath with a temperature of 500 degrees Celsius near him. Guy always got to work high, as in, couldn't function high. We worked at a grocery store, so the work wasn't hard, but we tried extra days of training anyway. Guy said the job was too difficult and that he was going to quit. We tried to convince him not to, but left him alone after that. About a week later, we have a picture of him in the office on the do not serve wall. Turns out he sent a letter to management threatening their safety and had a no trespass and no contact order for the premises. This guy Sharky continually came to work late, civil construction site, and then went out, got drunk and crap the bed. He then tried to wash an electric blanket in the washing machine. This all happened in the share house that my company pays for. People like this are building your bridges and roads. My electric blanket is machine washable. I mean, the rest of it is reprehensible, but maybe the blanket part isn't as bad as it sounds. He missed a major deadline and didn't tell anyone and didn't show up to work to face the music. Then they found out he was assigning some of his work to another co-worker but turning it in and saying he did it. Then they tried to fire him but he didn't show up for 3 days. They basically drove to his house to fire him. Watching pee on company computers and came to work high all the time. Also was an hour or two late every day. Guy lasted 1 week. I honestly thought this only existed in movies. I didn't realize there are actually people out there stupid enough to do this. A customer finally made a complaint about a sexual comment he made. Backstory: this guy was super weird with women, got really depressed a lot and would talk about being alone forever often, despite being 24. When he was in a good mood though, he would apparently be hitting on customers as a cashier at a fast casual restaurant. He's done some pretty creepy things towards women from the stories he's told me. The kicker was when a customer pointed to a picture on the menu and said that looks delicious, to which he said not as delicious as you must be. She phoned in and he was fired. Sounds like someone I used to be friends with. Nice looking guy. Nothing special, but still a nice looking guy. He couldn't figure out that the reason he couldn't get and keep a girlfriend was because he had such a crappy personality. I finally had to tell him that The Handmaid's Tale was not a how-to guide for dealing with women. We're no longer friends. 55-year-old slovenly pervert. Imagine the stereotypical neckbeard with a few more under his gut-covered belt. Walked up to a 17-year-old female employee, grabbed her face in both his hands and told her, "I want to teach you how to please a man." Security escorted him out of the building 20 minutes later. Do you think he came up with that on the spot, or something he'd been practicing for weeks in advance, like someone online told him that'd get him laid with certainty? You are not fired from the military, it's more like fricked up the rest of your life. In Idaho, he got caught smoking pot in 4-man berthing on base, and in the subsequent investigation was also on M, said the pot was to help him sleep after the M, and found out he had run up and defaulted on $10,000 of charges to his official use-only credit card. All of this 4 months out of boot camp. Was told you can't smoke pot on the job site. Was told that whatever he does off the clock, like during lunch, they would look the other way. He told them he needed to smoke at all times to deal with his anxiety. I was the one to recommend him for the position. He called in one night an hour before his shift because he had an ingrown hair on his stomach. The week after that he missed 2 days because he said his dad fell off the roof. What clinched it was he waited until we were slammed and went to the bathroom for the entire dinner rush. We found out a few weeks after he was fired that his dad hadn't fallen off the roof and he'd used that excuse at 3 other jobs. I saw him a few months after that hitchhiking on the road out of town and was obviously on some really harsh drugs. I'm guessing M. The repeated daddy roof failings drove him to the M, he swears. When he first got hired, he had an ankle monitor. He backed into a customer's vehicle 3 times. He missed work several times from being too hungover. He was a jackbutt a lot. He got pulled over because he drifted around a corner and it turned out he didn't legally have a license and got taken to court. He had gotten 3 DUIs and got arrested twice in 1 week. The second time he was fired, my employers finally decided not to bring him back. The second time he was fired. Oh, come on. I work at a high volume brew pub and we had this manager bartender who was completely nuts. She was crazy manipulative, threatened and physically assaulted multiple employees and constantly stole from the company. She was definitely medicated and when she drank she would act even more insane and go on tangents half to herself so you weren't quite sure if she was talking to you or not. One night she had a few drinks after work and choked out a hostess and popped a squat on our patio while guests were dining. Like legit pulled her pants down and started pee next to a table of people who were eating dinner. She was fired and banned from the premises the next day. I had a very similar colleague at a pub. Hasn't ever been fired to the best of my knowledge. I left. It was this crazy Turkish lady who told my friend Kieran he had the heart of the devil and he's going to heck for making a small mistake. And she lost 2 months worth of my tips while I found out she was making 5x what everyone else was. Way back in the day before internet at home was common. Printed some pee at work, but accidentally chose a printer locked inside a female co-worker's office. Hospital tech was working 3rd shift. He was using an out-of-view work computer to view pee. He had been doing this for about a month before he got caught. He was caught because one of the sites had infected the computer. When the decidedly female chief mammography tech started the computer in front of a patient in the mammography room, the screen started filling up with pop-up pee ads. When the investigation was done, The listing of all the sites he visited during his misadventure used up nearly a ream of paper. I'm trying to use this mammogram but I just keep getting pictures of tea. We had someone that was impossible to work with, largely because he couldn't listen or comprehend what others are saying. This isn't a language issue. He just literally could not comprehend what he was being told. He was so self-involved that it was impossible to get him to stop and listen to someone else. I was led over him for a project briefly simply because the project was going sideways. My way of dealing with him was to not assign any tasks to him that actually had to be done. I would assign him bugs we had already decided not to fix, and then refuse to help him. His favorite thing to do was ask for help, then argue, refuse to listen, and try to make the conversation take as long as possible, keeping the other person from doing their job. In the end, he got put on a PIP. He argued with our boss about it, all the while not comprehending what it meant, then left his office and went to the office of the next person up, who obviously knew of the PIP, and proceeded to argue with him. The great part was that the PIP was about comprehension and listening skills, and he completely failed to listen to this boss as well and was fired on the spot. He then kept saying he would go get his stuff from his desk and could not understand what they meant when he was told he could not go back to his desk and that they would ship him his personal possessions. He just kept repeating that he had to go back to his desk to get his stuff. Sounds like undiagnosed cognitive disability. I work at a large manufacturing plant. About once a week, a dude and his team leader accomplice would come to work before their shift, clock in, hide out in the locker room for 20 minutes during shift change, walk back out the gate and drive to a different job where the two would work for 8 hours. Then the accomplice would go in the system and put in a clock out time, making it look like they just forgot to swipe their badges on the way out, getting paid over $20 an hour while not even at the place. Due to absolutely terrible supervision at the plant on off shifts, it surprisingly took months before they got caught red-handed, fired, and a nasty lawsuit for fraud. There are plenty other stories, but that's the ballsiest on the part of the person getting fired that I can think of. Years back I worked in a gym briefly. The guy I replaced had been fired for getting caught having sex in the gym bathroom with a member during office hours. Idiot. For months after he left I would have hot blondes coming into the office to complain that payments were coming out of their accounts. He had been selling memberships by telling hot chicks they could have free memberships. He would complete the sale, take the commission, and cancel payments each month. Except when he left his plan fell apart because he wasn't there to cancel the girls' payments anymore. LA Fitness would have loved him, since they try to make it as hard as possible to cancel. You just can't show up and cancel a membership. You need an envelope and stamp to do it. At least this is how it was a few years back. Delivered pizzas for us for about 4 months without car insurance. Finally got caught after rear-ending someone on a delivery and paying him $200 cash to not report it. Told us he hit a wall. Might have gotten away with it if he didn't make a Facebook post about it the next day. Got drunk while working the bar, took his shirt off, and made out with a guy who was sitting at the bar. Fine dining restaurant. I saw this happen with a server working a $20,000 wedding buyout. He and that one girl who is drunk by the time the dance starts found each other, and by the second song were making out on the empty dance floor. Dude ended up unemployed. Girl went home with her unhappy, really drunk but not as drunk husband. We all made extra in tips. Kept falling asleep. We work in an open pit coal mine. The primary job is driving a 320-ton dump truck. Now everyone gets tired. We work 2 12-hour days, then 2 12-hour nights. Nearly everyone who's ever worked there has fallen asleep at the shovel or on break. We generally fess up to it, take the slap on the wrist, and move on. This guy would insist he was blacking out, then claim he was fine to keep driving. He brought a doctor's note saying he was fine, but the company sent him to their doctor and they called bulls. Allegedly, last I heard, he was told to pick up his stuff. Though he's still making sickness and ailment pay, he's not allowed to work on the site. We worked in a hospital lab, and he mentioned several times how easy it would be to bring firearms to work and get rid of some annoying co-workers. It was all, haha, just kidding, but luckily the higher-ups took it seriously. Poked holes in the cups so when we filled them up they would pour right onto the customers. Had anger problems. Not his fault, but probably not the best quality for a fast food employee. Was lazy. Showed up late a lot. Would purposefully mess up orders and get people the wrong drinks. And wouldn't stay clean shaven. We had a pretty strict rule on having no facial hair. The last straw was that one day he didn't show up at all. When the director called him to ask why he didn't show up, all he said was, "Yeah, I just didn't feel like showing." My director then informed him that didn't need to show up ever again. No was sad or surprised to see him go. Was working pizza and the GM hired a new driver, overall a decent guy, maybe a little slow at times, and doesn't seem to be picking up on simple things like how to do prep. About 2 months after he started, I'm the closing manager and I get a call at about 9 PM. It's the new driver saying he couldn't find the address the customer had given him. The only problem being I didn't know he was working that night, so I asked him what he's talking about. He was the opening driver. He had taken a delivery at about 2:30 PM just before I had gotten there, and when he looked up the address in his phone it told him that the address was for a place on the north end of Dallas. The pizza place was in Austin. This dumb butt had driven 6 hours there, then spent another hour trying to find a place that didn't exist. The next day the GM asked me to cover his shifts for the rest of the week as he was fired for an inability to perform essential job functions. I am somewhat impressed. That is a dedicated type of stupid. I worked at a cheese factory in a small town. During the off-season there was not a lot of work to be done around the place except for maintenance and housekeeping stuff. Our stores guy would go missing on an almost daily basis and only appear an hour or two before knock-off. He would usually say that he had just popped out for lunch or that he was working on something at the back of our site. Management couldn't prove he was skipping out on work, though, and when we were on production, he was generally good at his job. So they largely turned a blind eye. Where he fricked up, though, was when there was a local go-kart competition. He skipped out after lunch and competed in the main race, placing second. It got published in the local paper the following week and the manager read it while having his morning coffee. He went over and congratulated him on the result while handing him a suspension notice. HR terminated him the next day. Kicking a possum. We get a 15-minute break at 10 AM and 3 PM. At 10 o'clock break, this guy who hadn't worked there more than a couple of months walked out to the parking lot where he removed a cage trap containing a possum from the bed of his truck. He then opened the cage and shook the possum out onto the ground where it sat dazed and likely heat exhausted. The guy puts the trap back in his truck, then realizes the possum is still there, so he kicks the crap out of it, breaking its back to where it couldn't move if it wanted to. Then the sob just walks back inside, leaving the possum lying in the parking lot. Poor possum. Two classics from the same company. Employee A was a big dude, 6 feet 5 inches and not skinny, a crazy close talker. When he got upset, he got even closer. There were times he would be inches from someone's face. He was a contractor, so we let him go. When we checked his computer after he was escorted out, we found out he had been cruising dating sites and bomb-making websites. That HD went off to the FBI. We gave him the nickname the Lovelorn Unabomber. Employee B was just bad. He was brought in as a senior computer guy, but knew nothing. He would get halfway into something and just stop, then blamed everyone else. He had to work out at lunch, taking 2 hours to do so. Important meeting? Nope. Have to work out. What got him shit-canned was ski season. Our office was about 45 minutes from reasonably good skiing. About once a week, he would concoct some BS story about having to be in after lunch. At a meeting, in front of managers, I asked him how skiing that morning was. He turned bright red and said, it was okay. He was gone soon after. He ended up copying and pasting entire sections of other people's LinkedIn profiles to use as his own. The kid whose job included changing the folio, which is the line on each newspaper page with the page number and today's date. He was fired on August 33rd. Came to work drunk, like completely and utterly wasted. Was a radio DJ. It's bad enough to come to work drunk if you're not a radio DJ. It's extra bad to come to work drunk if you are a radio DJ. On your family friendly and the Canadian equivalent of the Bible Belt. Believe it or not, his career recovered. Nice dude who made a mistake. Almost didn't want to share this one because of that, but it's too good not to share. I almost feel like I know that guy, or it's more common than I thought. Same story. Was a radio DJ in my town and part-time terrible stand-up comic. Always getting suspended or fired and bounced out to Saskatchewan somewhere, then somehow ended up back here where he started. Still drunk though, but claims he's getting help. It doesn't seem to be working. I told the manager that if he didn't put a stop to the cook touching me and calling me everything but my name, I was going to file a harassment suit. Every time this cook touched me, I loudly stated, "Don't freaking touch me." When he called me babe, I'm not your babe. My name is Harper Fulkerty. Everyone in the place knew how I felt. There is no way he thought I was joking or flirting. After a few months, it only had escalated and I had had enough. Turns out one server who shows up on time and leaves her personal life at home is worth more than a good cook who turns up late and causes drama. Finally, justice for the fog. I was called a wuss and that I didn't get it when I complained about the kitchen being freaking vulgar and annoying to the women working. I stopped working service industry years ago because of it. Bosses of Reddit, what's the weirdest reason why you had to fire an employee? As a restaurant manager, caught a dishwasher making sweet love to a raw chicken breast in the bathroom. It was so awkward that I wish I hadn't even caught him. Nurse here. First job was in a nursing home. One resident told me there was a devil in the window and it kept scaring her. I thought dementia. Walked in the room just as a person in a devil mask slammed themselves against the window. I ran outside and tackled them and pulled off the mask a la Scooby-Doo. It was one of the CNAs. He thought that giving her a heart attack would be fair retribution for her being a little cranky when he took vital signs. Fired him on the spot even though I didn't have the authority to do so. It stuck. This is truly one of the most WTF stories I read in this thread. Also, good job on the auto fire. Oh yeah, and the tackle too. We had a kid that worked at the deli in the supermarket from my hometown who was fired after he ate all the skin off of every rotisserie chicken they had. The skin's the best part of rotisserie chicken. That monster. Sister had to fire my aunt. She got her a job at a call center for a cable provider. Aunt decided she didn't want to work for a few days. Called in and said her husband died. Sister found out when co-workers were pooling money to send flowers. It did not end well. Uncle never knew he died. That's an awkward Thanksgiving. I was a manager at a Jimmy John's some years ago. At this Jimmy John's we had a mentally handicapped 17-year-old kid who we basically paid to just clean the tables. Nice enough kid, but he had one slight problem. He would sneak away during the shift and masturbate in the bathroom. One night we had some friends of co-workers in to eat and one of them walked in. Oh, this kid in action. I know what you are thinking. He was probably bent over the sink, trying to get a quick tug out before anyone noticed his absence. No, he was sitting bare-assed on the floor, going to town on himself like nobody's business with his pants and underwear pulled down and only around one leg. So he freaks out, runs up and tells me, and we all actually have a nice laugh about it. I was probably 20 or 21 at the time and found this quite hilarious. After we had a good laugh about it, I told him we were lucky it was someone our co-workers knew, because he could potentially be in a lot of trouble. He said he understood and promised never to do it again. Fast forward to a week later. It's the lunch shift on a Sunday. We are slammed with deliveries and in-shop customers when I hear a very irate woman yelling, "I need a manager." She explains to me how her 15-year-old son just walked into the bathroom and saw one of our employees naked and masturbating. As if there is any question who it is. I start apologizing profusely. Once the kid got dressed and came out of the bathroom, she saw that he was handicapped. She lightened up quite a bit. I really don't even remember all the things she was yelling at me, but as you can imagine, she was pretty hot. I gave her $115 worth of gift certificates as well as the home number to the franchise owner since the kid got hired because his parents went to church with the owner. After I got the lady and her kid dealt with, I called the kid's mom and told him he can't work there anymore. She was furious and just told me the locks on the doors must be confusing to him and to teach him how to use them. So I said, why don't you just teach him how to not jack off in public? I mean, let's face it, if I can't jack off on the clock, why should he? $115 worth of Jimmy John's gift certificates. That's a lot of bootlegger clubs. Our company had a corporate apartment we used mostly for out-of-town clients when they came in for meetings. I usually handled the maintenance of it, monitoring the cleaning service, setting up fresh flowers, fruit basket, etc. for whenever it was going to be used. Eventually I got promoted and assigned those duties to my new assistant. One day she called in sick, so when I found out a client was in town last minute, I offered him the apartment for the night and met him there to show him where everything was, since he'd never stayed there before. Imagine my and his surprise when I opened the front door to find my assistant and her boyfriend engaging in a little friendly game of oral sex on the living room carpet. After I slammed the door shut and hurriedly got him in a cab to a hotel, I went back to work and listened to my voicemail. She had called to apologize for having lied about being sick. No apologies about the live sex show we'd just witnessed. Just sorry, I wasn't really sick. I just wanted a day off. Needless to say, that was the first of many days off for her. She didn't want to get off work. She wanted to get off at work. I used to manage a liquor store. The weirdest firing I ever had to do was also the fastest. We hired a rather rotund young man to be an evening clerk. Being a portly fellow myself, I saw no reason he couldn't manage the stocking and other physical parts of the job as well as I did. Evidently he didn't share that opinion. I knew there was going to be trouble when he started off his first day by trying to tell me what to do. And I mean within the first few minutes of his shift. When I asked him why he thought he was in charge, he explained that since he was older than me, I should do what he says. I was 22 at the time. He was 23. After explaining to him that, actually, the person with 3 years of experience in the position of manager does get to tell the new hire how to do his job, I proceeded to list out his duties, then asked him to restock our coolers. These were about 9 doors wide, with a walk-in refrigerated area behind. 30 minutes into what should have been a 10-minute job, I went to see how he was doing. I discovered that not only had he not stocked any beer, he had rearranged the cases into a makeshift chair, complete with a back and arms, and was just sitting in the 33-degree cooler like he was a cold miser in a Christmas special. When I asked WTF he was doing, he explained that he needed to rest because he was tired from moving all the beer cases, the ones he had rearranged to make a beer throne. I called the owner, explained I thought I'd be better off finishing the shift on my own, and gave the lord of the cooler his walking papers. To this day, he's still the most WTF employee I've ever had or seen. TLDR. New hire decided to give orders to manager, then build beer throne in cooler. Got fired in less than an hour. Yeah, but still, beer throne. The stuff dreams are made of. He took pictures of another co-worker pooping and posted it on Facebook. The pooper wanted to press charges for sexual harassment. These were guys in their 30s. A teacher at my school was fired for telling her class about her vagina and how beautiful it was. She taught mathematics. I worked at a Sonic in high school. I was promoted to night manager. First thing my boss had me do was call my grandparents to fire them. "Grandpa, I have to fire you and grandma." His reply, "I love you and I understand why this is happening. Tell your cocksucker of a boss that I'll be into work tomorrow and he can fire me himself." First time I ever heard him cuss. My wife had to fire a Guitar Center employee because he came to work late. His excuse, he was wired all night from smoking catnip. He wanted to feel what cats feel. I want to feel what cats feel. I think I'll go crap in a box. I witnessed an amazing termination. I work for a staffing agency with 2 different divisions, one industrial temporary and one more managerial level. I was in the middle of interviewing a guy who had just walked in claiming to have been laid off from a company the industrial temporary side works with. During the interview, one of my co-workers from the temporary side walked through and screamed, "Damn it, Ray. We fired you this morning. Get out of the building." Apparently the day before the guy pulled a knife on his boss, and his boss defended himself with a piece of lead pipe. They kept fighting and ran into the parking lot going at each other until quite a crowd formed. No one was seriously hurt, but you can't just try to knife people in the parking lot. When I asked him why he pulled a knife, he said it was because his new boss was acting like he was better than me when I'm twice his age. TLDR. Guy pulls a knife on boss. Boss strikes back with a lead pipe. Gets fired. Guy comes back the next day to try to interview for a job with the same company. One of our mid-level field consultants, father of 2, well-educated and decent guy. Got a pretty poor customer survey sent in from the CEO of one of our large financial clients. This CEO also brings his 2 white labs to the office just about every day. Fast forward a few days later, CEO calls us up saying he needs us to come in and review security camera footage. Apparently, when the aforementioned field consultant was tasked to go back and fix what he didn't fix the first time, he thought it would be great revenge to crap on the CEO's office floor and blame it on the dogs. Problem was, the CEO's dogs were being groomed that morning. We had to let him go. He had no regrets. She sent us a text that she was skipping her shift to do C. She then sent us a text immediately afterward that the previous text was meant for someone else and she was resigning. She was thinking, frick it, no way out of this one. Dang, though. He didn't exactly get fired, more like not hired. We pick up people from the Goodwill Helping Hands program, a program that finds work for those who otherwise have a hard time getting work. They are paid by Goodwill for I believe 2 months and then the place they're at decides if they want to hire them on or not. This has led to a series of hilarious trials. But one guy, he was an older guy, probably around 50. This guy didn't live too far so he walked to work every day. One day, as he tells it, a car scared him by driving by fast and too close to where he was walking. He crapped his pants. Instead of going home and changing, or coming into work and using our shower and spare clothes, he took his crappy underwear off and brought them into the kitchen to another employee. He then handed them to said employee and said, "Will you wash this for me, if you don't mind?" He had a lot of other issues going on that ended with him not being hired, but this is my favorite on that list. That guy was senior management material. I was fired from a dog kennel for unknowingly playing with a wolf. She thought I knew it was a wolf and I was being a reckless teenager. I was working at the McDonald's at the time and there was this Asian Frank. Well, I called him Frank cause no one could pronounce his real name. He was this overly relaxed type of guy. The following happened. Frank was working on the drive-in section. He had to fill the bags. Frank got hungry so he decided to eat a chicken nugget. Now instead of doing this in a quick and stealthy way, Frank decided to open an already packed chicken nugget box and take a nugget out. He did this right in front of the window, so the customer could clearly see Frank was eating his stuff. The manager also noticed, so I heard this scream from the back going, "The heck do you think you are doing?" Frank's reaction was priceless. He had a nugget halfway up his mouth. He just stared at the manager. Not angry, not defiant, just this normal deadlock stare, and he bit down, eating half of the nugget. Still staring at the manager, he proceeds to chew agonizingly slow, while putting the other half of the nugget back into the box and closes it. He then, still staring at the manager, puts the freaking box into the customer's bag. And that was Frank's career at the McDonald's. Typical Asian Frank. I work at a restaurant. Well, we recently had a new dishwasher start working that everyone thought was a little bit off. He'd say strange things and blink a lot when he spoke. Not like regular blinking, very forceful blinking. Almost like he scrunched his face up every time. Anyways, that's just a detail. It's actually not relevant. So he ends up staying later at work than anyone else, you know, doing cleanup and the like. Our establishment, like most places, has an accountant. Well, one night she was trying to remotely access the computers at the office at work, minding her own business, doing maths and all that, when someone starts closing her tabs. She keeps trying to reopen them, only to have them closed down again. Then the P starts popping up. Not just one site, this guy is accessing a buttload of P sites at the computer at work, thinking no one can see what he's doing, which, to be fair, you wouldn't normally think about. Anyways, she calls the boss, who then calls the restaurant. Of course the guy doesn't pick up, he's busy choking his chicken. Boss keeps calling. Eventually the dude answers the phone. Does he politely answer and say that we are closed? No, of course not. He yells frick off and slams the phone back down, so he can resume his so rudely interrupted business, no doubt. Anyways, the last we heard was that his keys were promptly taken from him the next day he showed up for work. Why he showed up again is beyond anyone's guess, and we now remember him as Jerk-Off Jeff. True story. I imagine this scene. Squeegee 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 fricking phone squeegee frick off squeegee squeegee squeegee. Not a boss, but I am in charge of training and performance reviews after a probationary period. Over 5 years. The top 3 outrageous reasons that come to mind. 1. One man we had hired could not make it to the bathroom in time, so he used the garbage chute to relieve himself. 2. One employee hollowed out a cantaloupe and merged it with a cucumber to make a fruit and veggie bong and toke up in the cooler. 3. One woman we hired would disappear for hours on end for medical reasons but always stay to make up for the time missed, so initially didn't question it. Then we found out through police she was a prostitute and would use the store as a pick-up and drop-off point for conducting business. TL Doctor. 1. Peeing in the garbage chute. 2. Fruit and veggie bong creation. 3. Prostitute first, employee second. I wasn't a boss at the time, but I had a co-worker that decided to leave work on the clock to pick up his friend. About an hour goes by and the store gets a call. It was my co-worker. He had to explain to management that he was in the back of a cop car for drag racing. The funny part is management had no idea he had left. Why would you even ring up? You'd simply play it cool. Say some emergency came up and you rushed out without clocking off or notifying anyone, and get them not to pay you for the entire shift. When I managed a porno theater adult toy store, I had to sit down with an employee and go over surveillance footage of him stealing a pocket pee and using it to masturbate in my stock room. I then handed him his final check, minus the cost of the damaged product. The most awkward and entertaining termination I ever had to conduct. When I managed a porno theater, that's all I needed to hear. An ungodly amount of pee, like enough pee to make a Redditor blush. His computer crashed, so he took it to our IT people and the hidden pee mountain was discovered. And it turned out that he was watching it at work, which I still have no idea how it was possible since we have open cubicles where you can easily see everyone's workstation. It's a shame because he was good at his job and a super nice guy to boot. On top of it all, his wife left him shortly thereafter. At least he had the pee, I guess. At my pizza place, I had to fire a guy because he called in sick and then ordered pizza for a party using his employee discount. Idiot. Poor guy was probably upstairs in bed sick with the party going on downstairs, being hassled by the partygoers to use his employee discount on the pizza they wanted and ordered it for them just to get them to leave him alone so he could go to sleep. Capital P. When I was 17 I worked at Wendy's and one night one of my co-workers had a really bad asthma attack in the back room. The manager insisted that no one call for an ambulance because the company would be liable. After about 10 minutes of this girl gasping for breath on the floor, I picked her up and took her to the OR where they gave her a shot of something to fix it. When I got back to work they fired me for leaving during my shift. I didn't even fight it. That was the worst job I've ever had. A coworker of mine got fired for greeting another coworker with "What up, blood?" A customer overheard him and got him reported. I got suspended once for not telling a guest with a peanut allergy that a peanut butter cookie has peanuts. I'm an art director and had to hire an assistant. She had an impressive portfolio, a decent, but not overly incredible, resume, and when I called her references, they sang her praises. HR seemed to think that was enough and approved her for the position. About a month later, I was smoking a cigarette with a guy from IT and he said how funny it was that my assistant constantly googled how to insert action here in Adobe Illustrator. I thought it was funny too. So I went to her desk, told her to save the page as a PDF, and she just froze and started trembling. Excuses, excuses, excuses. I walked away. Sure enough, I got a PDF 5 minutes later. I found her portfolio and did a reverse image search. Every last image was stolen. I called back one of the references and the number was not in service. I contacted HR. They did the background check, and it turns out she had just gotten out of prison for felony identity theft. She also had 2 gross misdemeanors for theft. She had never been a graphic designer and never even went to college. TL. DR. My ex-felon assistant graphic designer faked a portfolio, references, and resume and skated by googling how to do everything. For posting "I hate my new job" on his first day on Facebook, using an office computer while he was supposed to be working. LTP, do not add you boss on Facebook on your first day. Where to start? 1. Guy claiming our Mexican store manager planted a fake $20 in his drawer because he wanted to give his job to another Mexican. 2. Left my energy drink out in my office and came back to it spiked with cheap vodka. It tasted drastically different and sharp when I came back. Only other guy in the store stunk like that same cheap vodka. 3. Girl never showed up to open the store because she was on an impromptu road trip with her new man. 4. Guy was skimming ATM cashbacks, selecting cashback on debit and pocketing it. People in that area were rich as frick, they never noticed. Eventually he did it to 2 more employees and refused to give them receipts and got canned. He got caught over $20. He said on his way out the door that he had made $6K. 5. Standard lied on his application about a felony when his GF didn't lie for him. He gave her number as his parole officer when he got called out. He beat her bloody and brought her in to show me what I caused to happen when he came for his final check. 6. Bad BO. We got cited by the health department because customers reported rotting food. He was homeless apparently, but he had a shower in his hotel room and I'd given him money for deodorant. I tried. 7. Another guy I caught lying about his felony. When we fired him he tried to run me over in the parking lot. That's all I can remember offhand. ETA. This was when I worked for Taco Bell. The BO homeless guy came out alright and got a better job in his own apartment. The GF beater got off since she refused to file a complaint or testify. I'm sure he's in jail now though, so no worries. I should look that up sometime. I had to fire a guy less than a week after he started. This was back in the late 90s and he was supposed to be writing some HTML. Instead, he took apart the desktop we gave him, laid out all the parts and started air blowing them. Day after day. I don't remember all of it, but that Friday was the day my boss taught me how to fire someone. Not my story, but when my dad was in charge of HR for this company, he had to fire an employee for asking another employee if she shaved her pee. Apparently, the female employee was sitting in the break room when the man just sauntered in there, sat next to her for a minute or so, and then popped the question. When their supervisor came to report it to him, my dad almost fell out of his chair laughing. I don't know if this is weird or just mind-blowing. I started my job a couple months after the previous manager had quit. My employees all loved her, and I soon figured out why. She did 80% of their jobs for them, and never disciplined or even spoke to anyone about anything negative they were doing. So I immediately notice one lady is always late for her shifts, not by 5 minutes. I wouldn't care about that. She's coming 35-40 minutes late, every shift. After a few times I sit down with her and explain to her she's expected to be on time. We have this conversation. Me, you need to stop coming in consistently late. You literally haven't been on time in 2 weeks. Her, I can't help it, the bus I take is slow. Me, so you take an earlier bus. Her, but then I'd have to get up a half hour earlier in the day, do my chores a half hour earlier, and all that. Me, yes, this is correct. You do what you have to do to get to your job on time. It's not like you have to get up at 5 in the morning to be here. Your shift doesn't start until 1 or 2 p.m. So this works for like a week. She starts coming on time, until one day she comes in 35 minutes late for her shift. 3:35. Upon her arrival she asks if on her 15-minute break she can go take a walk around the block. I tell her she can do whatever she likes. It's her break. She takes her 15-minute break at 3:45, 10 minutes after she arrives. So I'm working, everyone's busy, and about 90 minutes later I say, hey, wait a minute, where's person's name? Everyone realizes she never came back from her break. It's about 5 o'clock, so it's time for me to go home. So I leave and ask my employees to keep me updated. I'm driving home and I get a call from another manager at another one of our locations. We provide mental health services for individuals, and she is ripshit. Her, why the frick is person's name over at my program? Me, wait, what? Her, I just got a call from one of my employees stating person's name, showed up, demanded entrance into the program, was told no because they didn't know who she was, and then pushed by them. They called me, and I happened to recognize the person as being one of your employees. Me, are you crapping me? She disappeared 90 minutes ago. I've had no clue where she is. Her, She walked over to our program, barged in, and then started talking to clients and writing down their personal information, saying it was for a school project. Frick me, just fail on so many levels. Ironically, the lady really was just doing a school project, but she could not understand why I was upset that she showed up 35 minutes late for her shift, took her 15-minute break 10 minutes after getting there, went to another program, assaulted staff to gain access, and then began berating other patients for their personal health information. When I laid it out for her like that, she said, "Yeah, but you said I could walk around the neighborhood when I took my 15 inches. Ugh." This is possibly more creepy than weird, but I feel it falls into both categories. I used to be a supervisor at a large national grocery chain, and you know how hard it can be to keep help at those places, so we'd get some real winners. We hired this one guy, I'd say around 50. He spent all his breaks and lunches in the break room with a notebook in front of him, working on his mathematical formula for solving the lottery. He walked to work and always seemed to be a bit off, so I always tried to at least generally entertain his ideas when I was in the break room with him. And man, they were out there. Being a grocery store, we were also a major employer of underage people. One in particular was a 16-year-old girl named Heather. Heather was a sweet girl, fairly average looking, who was always quite nice to this guy. One day I'm standing behind the registers supervising, when a bagger comes up to me and hands me a note, saying, "This was just given to Heather." I take a look, and it's a horrible, fairly explicit poem signed by this creep. I practically ran up to the manager's office and they called the girl's parents and rang up HR to let them know they were getting the creep out of there today. Heather got called upstairs as well, and we kept her there while escorting creepy guy off the store grounds. He proceeded to go through the union and appeal his firing all the way up to the district manager level, and each time they'd just pull out the poem and turn him down. For a while after that I'd just see him wandering around town. No idea what he's up to now. I suppose it's perhaps not supposed to be funny, but the first few words of the poem make me giggle every time I think about them. Heather, dressed in leather. What was the "I'm fired aren't I" moment you experienced or witnessed? I was just having friendly chit chat with a guy at my new job with a work messaging app. Mostly talked about food and how he was always hungry, just water cooler stuff. And then apparently his jealous GF read the messages and decided we were flirting. It eventually led to the both of them writing an email and sending it to my boss, accusing me of being inappropriate and using work tools to be inappropriate. I have barely worked here a month, so I thought I was going to get fired. Thankfully my boss realized how crazy dude and his GF is and I'm still here. Kinda turned off on being friendly to anyone else though. I walked into the prep area of the yogurt shop. I managed to find an employee humping the ice machine. He was just goofing off, but I had a sudden evil urge to play it crazy serious. I said, "Michael, that ice machine is company property and deserves your respect. I'm afraid I'm going to have to take disciplinary action." He literally hung his head and asked, "Will my parents find out?" It took me 10 minutes to convince the poor guy that I was just kidding and he wasn't in trouble. It was my first management job and I didn't fully understand that my authority came with a responsibility not to scare the employees. The first time a customer complained about me I was like 16 and for sure thought I was gonna lose my job. My boss walked over and said, "That lady is a freaking idiot. Don't worry." Sounds like a good boss. Company I worked for was losing money fast, and their employees' checks were bouncing. This was right around Halloween, so as a joke I went to work as a bounced check. The CEO got wind of an employee wearing a bounced check. He walked around the campus looking for me and found me in the warehouse chatting with some guys. 3 days later I was pulled into HR and my position was eliminated. 10/10 would do again. A+. I work in a company that is owned by a really large company. We have quite a few sister companies. Big industry thing. Got an email from a guy in a sister company that was meant to be sent to just a few people at his workplace, but he blasted it out to everyone in the corporate directory. Literally everyone. Thousands of people. It was this xenophobic joke that I can't even remember clearly, but something equating black kids to monkeys in the classroom. Nearly immediately after that he sent out another email apologizing for it, but I heard through the grapevine he was fired immediately along with 1 or 2 of the other people on the email. I appreciate the quotes around joke. Sounds like that fella got what he had coming to him. The video of Nintendo of Russia's CEO swearing while not realizing he was on live video. He walked up behind two people playing Mario Kart and somehow managed to miss the fact that they were playing Mario Kart competitively, that there was a camera pointed at them, and that multiple people pointed out that they were on live video. So this Mario Kart live stream has the CEO in the background cursing at his employees for being incompetent. In addition, he's apparently really bad at economics and lost the company a lot of money by refusing to stock a game and running out of units to sell, along with being accused of gender-based harassment. I have no idea if he was actually fired, though. He hasn't been fired, but Nintendo is doing an investigation. I would not be surprised if they do fire him though. Co-worker while being caught not performing count procedures at a prison. All that was required of the officer was to walk past 84 cells and confirm breathing bodies. Rank comes down to see where count was, finds co-worker sleeping in supply closet, attempts to wake Jigger having already failed. Rank then finds the officer's already completed count sheet in his lap, meaning it was filled out in advance, which is grounds to be immediately fired. A co-worker just hangs his head and starts grabbing his belongings before being escorted out. I was working as a manager for a parking garage at a hospital in my early 20s. Supervising the valet crew was part of my job. A lot of the valet guys were either 20 somethings without much direction or 60 plus guys working a job in semi-retirement. One of the older fellas mistook the gas pedal for the brake while trying to drive a heavily modified transport bus, modified with lifts, gurney strapping points, etc. He totaled 6 cars before the bus finally came to a stop. I ran towards it thinking he was probably hurt. Before I got there he hopped out of the bus, shook his head and looked at me. So, I'm probably fired, right? I don't remember what the final total was on the insurance claim, but yes, he was fired. I really want to see a video of this. I don't think my imagination is doing it justice at all. I spoke out in a clearing meeting. It's a safe space about all the upper level hiring and blatant lack of promotions coming from a consultant who was handpicking all these new hires. I was fired a couple weeks later for unclear reasons. Eat a dong, go pro. At the time, my job was testing the front end of a large billing database. Manager told me to test on beta. At the time, I thought of beta as a staging environment with mock data, not an alternative front end to our production database, which it never should have been. When I test, I always use obviously fake numbers. So here I am, in a production DB, making bills. And anyway, the next week a real life customer wanted to know why he had a bill for $420.69. Surprisingly, I didn't get fired at that point. I was 16 and working in a Chinese restaurant. I went to put soy sauce on a table for 2 customers who were waiting for their food. The sauce slid off my tray and onto the interior of one of the customers' leather jacket. It went everywhere. He was really nice about it and in the end my boss just made fun of me for about a month. I was working the cash register at a pet store about 2 weeks after starting when a woman came up, bawling that her dog just died and she was returning all of these medical supplies, all small but expensive items from the same aisle. Not that I knew that at the time, without a receipt. Every time I tried to say something, she would just bawl harder. I felt terrible, so I returned them, gave cash or a gift or something. A week later, I get called into the office, and my manager informs me that she stole those items, and then returned them to make money. Needless to say, I wasn't there long. I hated that place. People get mad when nothing can be done without a receipt, but that's the exact reason why they ask for a receipt. Don't feel bad though, it's easy to do and even retail vets do it. I was working at my parents' convenience store and a lady came in demanding to see the owners and that she would be having many words with them, all because I made her pay for her gas before she got it. We do this for everyone. So I tell her she can call them from my phone since they were at home. She screams at me some more about seeing them tomorrow in person and leaves. I tell my parents while expecting them to laugh it off. And sure enough their exact words were, "Oh, that lady's a freaking psycho, haha, just ignore her." Never saw that lady again and she never called them. I got a job designing refueling trucks for airports when I was 20. I knew how to draw things and weld a little, but that was it. I made it about 3 years before we got bought by another company with real engineers. I fricked up often. I don't even recall what it was this time. Probably just something not fitting at all. But I got fired. I knew it as soon as they asked me to come to the office. I still see trucks I designed when I travel. It's an odd industry with very little competition. It was like working at Monster Garage. Considering my lack of any qualifications, I think I managed to pull off some crazy crap. I still see trucks I designed when I travel. I'm imagining the car Homer Simpson designs but with a fuel hose. I worked for the property management company I rented from. When I moved out, they thanked me for renewing my lease and asked me to leave an anonymous review. I did, and I expressed several complaints I had as a renter. Massive urine stain, broken light switches, absurd mandatory $30 filter delivery program that delivered the wrong size of filter, and unresponsive property manager who addressed none of these issues all year, etc. After submitting my anonymous review, my boss emailed me asking me if I left the review. It had my address, name, phone number, and email listed. I was amazed when I wasn't fired right then and there. I trained the new guy 3 months later and was let go when I finished training him. I now make $6 more an hour and never have to use my time off pay to fill in the shortage of hours. My boss made a terrorist joke about me and I said, at least I get 72 wives instead of losing one to some butthole I don't even know. He was going through a divorce. I still think it was worth it. If you're going to make an edgy joke, you should be ready to receive one back. I worked as a shift manager at an auto parts store. Long story short, I reported a guy distributing drugs from the store to the store manager and police. 2 days later, an auditor came in from regional and started accusing me of stealing, and I was so confused, and next thing I know I'm resigning under duress for something I never did. Turns out everyone was in on it and I ruined their gig. I was young and raised in a pretty sheltered home, so I had always assumed adults had integrity. This was my second job. I was 19, working as a housekeeper in a resort for about 3 months. It was one of the last rooms we had to clean for the day and it was completely trashed. Was so tired and overwhelmed with everything I forgot to clean the rubbish bins. My manager came through and double checked everything and found what I had forgotten and proceeded to give me the longest lecture of my life. That's not what got me fired. She pinned a bunch of her frick ups on me. Like how once I was cleaning a room with her and she didn't check a blanket folded up in a cupboard because nobody uses them anyway and the next guest found a used condom in it. Or how she completely missed a room when assigning us ours and it never got cleaned. Horrid old cow. At my last firm, I made a mistake that basically cost $30k. The partner chewed me out a bit and showed me how I had fricked up, but then at the end, he just said, now I bet you'll never make that mistake again. Basically he figured that they taught me a very expensive lesson. Might as well get their money's worth. Well, I've been forgetting to do thank you notes for new clients for the past 2 months, so I might be in it now. I still have 4 hours in the day, so we'll see. Mayo. I am still employed. No actual discussion about it has happened, but if I was going to get fired it would have been today. A coworker accidentally dropped a database table for a major multi-million-dollar client. There is no part of the job where we'd ever need to use a drop command, but he did it all the same. Imagine going to a company like Amazon and just wrecking their site for a few hours. That's big money. Fortunately for him, he was just moved to customer relations since everyone loved him even if he was a dum-dum. Fortunately for us, I created a backup of the database before he started because I didn't have the highest confidence in him, which is also probably why I'm now a manager. Haha. I was the third key who locked up for the night at a coffee shop. I'd cleaned the place and put away this crock pot on top of the freezer for the night. One night, the power cord from the crock pot shut in the freezer door when I left. The door popped open during the night and all its contents melted out on the floor. I made a change to our McAfee account where I applied the EEPC, endpoint encryption, tag to all computers that didn't have it. I had been forgetting to do so as I was going and wanted to cover my tracks. 2 weeks later my boss asked who was making changes, and when I confessed she said, congratulations, you just encrypted our SQL servers. Foo up me. I was 15 or 16 coming in for my third ever shift at a pizza joint. I was stoned in the way you can only be as a 10th grader, where you're thinking that you're sly but everyone can tell because you smell like weed, cheap body spray and have Cheeto dust around your mouth. I smoked a blunt like 10 minutes before coming in, and as I started putting my gloves on my manager came up and said, "Hey man, go talk to F in the back. He needs to give you your new hire drug test." I was freaking out. I had just gotten my first car and needed the money, so I started sweating it thinking I was gonna get booted. Right as I went to knock on the owner's office door and accept my fate, everyone started laughing at me and telling me it was a joke. That's how I found out all my co-workers smoked weed. Happened about 20 minutes ago. I messaged our CEO saying that our benefits are crap. Swore I'd be gone. He agreed and told me to look into it more with HR. Go figure. My boss hadn't paid me for over 2 months, so at one point I demanded the money to be on my bank account by the next day, or else I'd sue them. I received my final pay the next day and I got rid of that awful job at the same time. You shouldn't have told them before suing. Could have filed them over and won more money at the same time. She accidentally started to delete the law firm's entire database and didn't tell anyone about it. What got her fired is that she wouldn't fully say what happened. Even if her story was 100% true, there's no way of fully believing her because she constantly makes up excuses for when she messes up. Nothing was ever her fault. I really feel bad, but apparently our boss had other issues with her, so this just made him not want her here anymore. This happened yesterday and we have 2 people interviewing today. I used to work at Forever 21. One day I was in the bathroom and overheard 2 of my managers talking crap about an employee and saying that they're going to let him go soon. I went and told the guy to watch out, that they might be firing you soon. Word quickly spread. I get called in the manager's office, back room, and she says that she overheard that I'm telling people lies. Shocked, I looked at her and said, "No, I heard you say what you said. I'm not crazy, and don't pretend I am. Don't talk about private things in non-private places." I thought I was going to get fired right there. She just said, "Okay, that will be all." Classic attempt at gaslighting there. Working in a bar, one of the evening staff come in, having evidently been out all afternoon drinking, and from knowing them, likely doing coke and pills too, they immediately aggressively insulted one of the bar's best customers, good friend of the landlord, and then looked at me. Their face dropped. All I said was, "Leave," and spoke to the landlady lord later. He was sent a message not to come back. My first day welding professionally, I ruined a $65,000 door. Told my boss ABD showed him the issue. I just looked sane to his face. ABD said, "I'll go grab my tools. Thanks for the chance to work for you." He just laughed and told me to grab the prints and start building a new door. We ended up fixing the door. Growing up, I used to coach gymnastics before my own practice. At the time I was roughly 14, and the kids that I coached were 8-10. It was basically make all these hyper kids tired. You have 45 minutes, and can use all this cool equipment here. Key thing there is that I was not an adult. Anyway, one child in particular was peculiar. He would eat the chalk, physically harass other kids, cut lines, not do his push-ups, cry at the littlest things. I could go on. One day I lost it. About 5 minutes into the session I screamed at the kid and made him sit in a corner, facing the corner. 15 minutes later I realized his mother was watching from the observation area upper floor. I was sure she would do any of the following. 1. Demand a refund. 2. Complain about me. 3. Claim her child is flawless. Practically the messiah. Nope. She thanked me for disciplining her child, while glad not to be in any trouble. My only real thought was, "Lady, that is your job." Walking into work on Monday morning after drunk texting a picture of my butt to my boss. Luckily for me, he thought it was freaking hilarious. When I was a teen, I took an overnight seasonal stocking job at Walmart. I had never been forced to stay up overnight and didn't realize how much I wasn't prepared. The first night flew by but couldn't sleep when I got home, so I went into night 2 with no sleep. Struggled through and got home but couldn't sleep or barely slept. Night 3 I was done for. Around 1 AM I just said F it, and the little area where they keep bouncy balls, I buried myself in there. They have to individually sticker toys, so they called me to come get a pallet and I was nowhere to be found. They basically had a search party looking for me when someone made a complaint she saw someone's legs sticking out from where I burrowed into. The manager woke me up and I kinda said yeah I am fired and walked away. He never said it, so maybe I'm still employed from 11 years ago. At my last workplace there was a literal emergency button that shut off the servers. It was a financial company and I worked in IT. One night a worker pressed the button. Not sure if it could have been accidental. It was pretty well labeled, and like half the IT department had to drive in the middle of the night to fix it. People were very pissed the next morning. None of the managers would give out the name of the person though, for obvious reasons, so no one knew if they got fired or not. Not my story, but my friends. They were working on an archaeological dig site when someone in the team managed to cut through the electricity mains cables. They miraculously didn't hurt themselves, but all of their power goes and they soon realize the adjacent town's power has gone too. The site supervisor calls the company in charge of the electricity grid and gets himself very worked up. When the grid guy arrives and asks what happened, the site supervisor explains it to him and he nods thoughtfully before saying, if that's what happened, I have to do a lot of paperwork and someone somewhere gets into big trouble. I'll ask you again and you say squirrels appear to have chewed through the cable. So, what happened here? Supervisor replies that squirrels appear to have chewed through the cable. Grid guy writes that down and they get on with fixing it. Boss came to me one day. He says he wants to show me something. He shows me a gate I've welded badly. This wasn't the first one I had messed up without realizing it, and I could tell he was going to shout at me about it. All I said was, am I gone then? And he said yes. In fairness to him, I was given 2 weeks notice and a huge chunk of unclaimed holiday pay as well. My last payslip had over $1,000 before tax on it. This actually happened about 15 or 16 years ago when I was teen. I used to work at CVS, and one of the cashier's duties were to develop film. Back when people still use 35mm cameras. Man, that makes me feel old. Anyway, this kid Brent also worked there. He always seemed kind of like a delinquent, but I had never seen him do anything too off the wall until this one girl brought in some film one day. He developed it and she had some pretty revealing bikini pics in some of them. Well, Brent decided to make multiple prints of them, and the one pharmacist in the back found out somehow and told the store manager. I wonder what you're doing these days, Brent. I was in a meeting with some co-workers, the boss, and this new lady from another agency. She starts throwing out buzzwords like proactive and paradigm, and I say, aren't those words that dumb people use to sound important? Not that I'm accusing you of anything like that. I was fired on the spot. Don't think of it as being fired. Just think of it as them proactively shifting their paradigms. When my company's IT director sent me a copy of the DMCA notice they got because of me, I was using my personal laptop at work and forgot to close out BitTorrent before leaving home one day. I promptly resigned before they could fire me. My boss made a 5 or so foot long sub for a catering event he had later in the day. He put it in a container and told me to bring it to his car. I held it, as a normal person would. I at least thought, with one hand around the second foot and one around the fourth foot of it. Well, the middle caved in and more than half of it fell. Everywhere. All of that meat on the ground. All of that meat. Well anyway, one of my boss's family members was there that day and she tried her best to keep his head from exploding. Took almost a week for that normally friendly man to look me in the eyes without wanting to scream. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.